podcast. Total Survey Design. Welcome to Season 2.
My name is Azdren Tsoma. In this episode, I sat down with Thom Allen. Thom has worked as a project manager at the Social and Economic Sciences Research Center for nearly 40 years, working on well over 1,000 projects. Our conversation was recorded in a busy coffee shop, so there will be some background noise. In any case, I think the audio quality is okay, so enjoy the conversation.
I was here at WSU, at Washington University, in the mid-'80s as an undergraduate, and I had absolutely no connection with surveys, no designs of becoming anything in terms of like a survey researcher, or it was my college roommate who was working at the SSRC as an interviewer, as a telephone interviewer at the time, and he left his job and he just said, "Hey, if you're looking for a new job," I was working I think I was waiting tables, trying to get through college. He says, "My position just opened." So I said, "Yeah, it's better. It sounds better than waiting tables." So I applied and I got this student position in something I knew absolutely nothing about. And within about a week, I absolutely fell in love with it. And so I've been there. About 37 years later, I'm still here.
You didn't mind cold calling people?
I loved it. It made me very nervous at first, but it was a challenge. When you're talking to different types of people, after you've done this for a while, you can kind of, certainly separate yourself from any sort of, negative personal attacks a person might deliver at you pretty quickly. You learn that pretty quickly. Either that or you burn out. But then it became a challenge is to, within the first maybe 10 or 15 seconds of talking to somebody, try to figure out, what type of tone should I use? What type of, how should I deliver this introduction in a way that will maybe resonate with this person? I think I was pretty good at it. And so I enjoyed it. It's always, every call was a challenge.
Do you think these call centers, their approach to surveys has changed a lot in the last 30 years?
Yeah. I don't take too many telephone survey calls anymore. It used to happen a lot. Every once in a while, I'm surprised because I'll usually a commercial group that's making some sort of a telephone survey call, and you'll get an interviewer on the other end who seems to be trained in the same type of techniques that we know, that we use at our center, and that we know work. But I'd say it's fairly rare. Most of the time, you get people calling up, and it's just, they don't have the basic answers to questions like, who is sponsoring this, what's the purpose of this call. I would encourage people who maybe are listening to this podcast that if they do get these types of survey calls on the phone, to take those calls and then just ask politely those simple questions just to see what type of answers you get. For me, when I get somebody that says, "Oh, I can't tell you that," that's typically a sign for me to say, "Well, thank you very much," and sign off.
No, it reminds me of Don Dillman's social exchange theory, and also talking about trust and increasing your, authority with the survey. So I've taken a lot of surveys on Prolific, and I've noticed a lot of times in the name area, like where they're supposed to list who is conducting the survey, somebody might list just their university, like whatever, wsu.edu or something. On the other hand, I'm like, when I posted my survey, I posted my name and last name and contact information and email address, and it's like, if you have any questions, you could reach out. And I'm doing a legitimate survey here.
That is exactly right. That's the Don Dillman school of interviewing. Oftentimes I think that is not necessarily the way that the old leverage saliency folks, maybe out of the University of Michigan, and those folks typically will train their interviewers to do interviews. Their techniques, are slightly different than the Dillman technique. But here's the thing I always say is that, a lot of times those folks, out of those shops, they're calling the East Coast a lot more than we are. We're calling the West Coast a lot more. And as one of the things that I did after I was interviewed was a supervisor of our lab. So I got to supervise hundreds of survey research projects while doing 5 years of that. And on the occasions when we would especially survey, the East Coast, New York City, our techniques just simply didn't work. And I know that shops like the University of Michigan and some of those that use the leverage saliency techniques, that they are successful. So I think that there is really a place for the different types of techniques depending on where you're calling. I think the West Coast, generally, the western half of the United States, seems to be fairly receptive to these. Just what you just described when you set up your prolific surveys is that real personal
So you're saying,
approach.
Do you think there's like a cultural difference then?
I do. I really do think there is a cultural difference. I mean, we know this internationally with surveys, is that across the international spectrum, that there's certainly cultural differences in how a researcher should set up their surveys, their questions, their approach.
So then, this gets me thinking about Dillman 2014 book. Is it then applicable throughout the world, or do you have to take it with a grain of salt? And then what do you do? Like, how do you approach that problem?
This is why I just love chatting with you, Osdren, about these things, because we have these conversations, and then you come up with these really great questions like that. I think that would be an excellent thing to study. I think you will find differences. I think you will find that there are certain cultures, like I said, maybe just even the East Coast of the United States, which may not be as receptive to the approaches. That a good example, Pierce Greenberg's study with Don Dillman, where they used. Are you familiar with that one? Did you see that?
Remind me which one, because I know we've talked about Greenberg before, and something not working out in Appalachia, but
It was in Appalachia, and it was actually from Pierce's, where he grew up in Southwest Virginia, and he was surveying residents of coal mine towns and talking about environmental issues. And so they had an experimental design where they used a very standard Dillman approach, a very standard one. And then they used a very personal, they leaned into the personable side of things. I thought it was really unique, and I thought it was a really interesting study because Pierce introduced himself in the written materials to the respondents as somebody who grew up, a native son, and then had basically a dialogue with the respondents. He included pictures. He talked about his experiences in there, and we wanted to see well which one is going to work better, and that, at least in that particular culture, that particular group of people, and in that particular study, that personable approach did not do as well, significantly.
So there's like a statistical difference.
Yes, there was. Yes. Wow. Yeah. So the more now I say it was kind of the more mainstream Dillman approach, it was just it was just that standard introduction and a standard set of questions, but set up in a way that Dillman prescribes in his book. That one did better than this more conversational. So there's a good example right there.
That's actually pretty fascinating.
Isn't it?
I gave guest lectures in my hometown in North Macedonia, based off of the social exchange theory approach to survey design. And now I'm having doubts. I'm like, am I teaching them the right approach? But then again, I'm also talking about like the very basic considerations about any survey. So I know they learned something, but it really gets me thinking about how you might approach a survey different if you're conducting it like West Coast, East Coast versus somewhere in India But then again, India is such a huge country. Like, there must be differences between India, north
Yeah.
and south, and like other parts, and Europe, Western Europe, Eastern Europe, China, whatever.
A little saving grace here would be that just remember that TDM, which is Don's methodology, stands for Tailored Design Method.
Yes.
So that's exactly what he would prescribe: is like know your audience and tailor your approach for the best results there. I mean, the big thing is mitigating any sort of respondent burden, reducing burden, and increasing the perceived benefits. Right? That's the big thing that I think that Dillman is shooting for.
A lot of pre-testing and evaluating whether or not the results are making sense.
Yeah, and of course, one of the things that Dillman, he always preached this, and we rarely actually had the chance to do this. But we'd have so many conversations. I mean, I guess one of the things that I should say is that early on in my career at the SSRC, I was introduced to Don Dillman, and I became his project manager, and had been his project manager for 30-some years up until he passed away. So I worked on all of his projects at the SSRC. But one of the things that he would say is just to make sure we keep in our minds that we're going to monitor from the moment we launch a survey. And if we see something that is of concern, we're going to have to sit down, reconfigure, figure out if there's something that we need to pivot on, and make some changes that we can do without, causing problems for the study.
Altering the measurements of the questions.
Yes. But we just didn't have a chance to do that. And so that's something that, again, back to your point, would be that if you were going to be using, Dillman survey methods in different countries, that would be something to keep to just make sure you monitor and go, are we getting feedback from our respondents that are just telling us that we're seeing a problem, especially a cultural issue, and is it something that we can address? So.
Interesting. So talking about tailoring a survey, like one of the things that I'm curious about is like what might have been like one of the biggest challenges or puzzles that you've had to solve. I mean, it could be anything. I know it's probably hard to recall from all the projects you worked on, but something that was like actually difficult to try to figure out.
That's a good question. Osrin, as you know, because you've worked on a lot of these surveys now at the SSRC, and each survey that we bring in is unique with unique problems and unique obstacles and issues that you have to deal with. So in a sense, most of the projects that we work on have got some interesting, unique challenge. Gosh, the ones that I think of, this was a really interesting one that led to another project of the same type. We had this about 15 years ago. We were approached by the Olympia Harbor Masters. It was the Port Authority of Olympia, Port Authority. They were interested in trying to estimate the amount of boat fuel that was sold at one of the fueling stations nearby. It was the only one. It was the only fueling station. And they said, is there a way that we can measure this? Oh my gosh, I have no idea. So this was a big challenge for us. And the solution was so much fun. So we ended up calling up we identified every one of the harbors that were within a certain radius of the city. We talked to the harbor masters in each one and got them to agree to include a postcard, a stamped postcard with our survey questions on the back, to include that with their moorage bill for each ship. So every boat and ship in each of the harbors, we did a population study of boats. And so everybody got in their bill this little survey, had 4 or 5 questions that we needed in order to measure what it was we were measuring. And they could just fill it out, and postage was already paid. It was a really fun solution to a really difficult, because how would you measure that population? Otherwise, there's no sample frame that exists.
I mean, so do you remember the response rate? Roughly?
I'm thinking it was around 30%. And we ended up giving them we ended up estimating for the entire fleet what that annual fuel purchases were, and they used those data to go ahead and justify putting in a city-funded, environmentally friendly, high, like it was a high volume fuel pump to service all of those harbors and all of the boats and ships in the area. That was really cool because we got to see it. We got to see our survey have some real world results. But then we got approached about a month later by the state of Washington. It was the Parks Department, and they had a similar issue. They had. Do you remember the movie Sleepless in Seattle?
Yes.
If I've told you this story.
Well, you haven't told the podcast.
Oh, I'm sorry, podcast. Let me tell you this story. It's so much fun. So this movie, this Tom Hanks, Meg Ryan movie, Sleepless in Seattle, comes out in I guess it would have been in the 90s, early 90s. And everyone that watched it said, "Oh, I need to buy myself a houseboat and move to Seattle." And our clients from the state were telling us that people were just driving in with these big houseboats on these flatbed trucks into Seattle with no place to put them. And so they had just this massive problem. So they ended up agreeing to allow these people that were bringing these houseboats into Portage Bay, which is a little bay in between Lake Union and Lake Washington. It's a little man-made bay up by Gasworth Parks. And these were kind of unregulated. And so people were, dumping their houseboat waste. Somehow they were supposed to be using companies to come and pump out their
waste.
Their waste.
Yeah.
But there was plenty of evidence that people weren't doing that and that they were just dumping into the bay. It was a major problem. So they wanted us to do a repeat design somehow to contact all of these houseboats and to find out how they were dumping their waste. And we did the same thing, actually. It worked out just about as well. We ended up with the same response rate.
You mean you placed the survey questionnaire, the invitation for the survey, or the survey questionnaire?
We placed it was a postcard. It was a paid postcard, okay. And we got the various folks who were in charge of
the lots.
Yeah, to include this in their bill, in their monthly bill.
Is it the whole survey in that little postcard? Okay.
It's like 5 or 6 questions. Yeah. We can fit it on the back. So it was just kind of a unique solution, I think. That.
Well, how do you get people to snitch on themselves about where they dump their waste?
If people were just dumping their waste in the lake, I'm sure they didn't say that. It was more like which companies were you using, which legal solutions were you using, and that was the folks at the state level, they used those data to figure out a plan to move forward to making sure that those solutions were available to everybody. Everybody knew that they didn't have to throw their waste overboard. So, fun stuff. That was our poop in Portage Bay study.
So here's another question that I'm curious. Now, I mean, the Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Let's remind our listeners. So is this idea that once you learn a little bit about something new, that you have no, in general, we don't have a grasp about how much we really actually know, so that we overestimate our knowledge of something.
Right.
And then the more we learn, that curve kind of dips down and we feel like we don't know enough. And then finally, it dips up again, but after a long time. And
what you're saying, Osdren, is that the older we get, the less we really know.
So when I started learning about surveys, I caught myself maybe overreacting to other surveys that I was taking. So but I don't react with as much emotion anymore. But still, when I get a survey, it really kind of I don't know, bothers me when I see that, here's a survey that I'm getting, and they could have done the research, but there's just so many flaws and so many errors, and like I don't know how to think about it or how to respond. So my question to you then is like, what happens now when you encounter surveys? And I didn't mean to lead you on. Like, this is a terrible interview kind of question, because it's like, I'm telling you how I felt.
Yeah, I get it.
I'm not expecting you to have it felt the same way.
I get it.
Good thing I don't do phone interviews.
You're doing just fine, Audrey. You're doing great.
But
so you want to know
non-scientific.
Yeah. So you want to know what do I do when I run across a survey that's maybe,
or what crosses your mind, or what do you think, or how do you respond, or do you email the person responsible with the survey with like threats?
I used to do that. I don't do that anymore, though. I just, it's actually, that's a very interesting question, because I do take a lot of surveys. In fact, I took one this morning. And I think that what I do nowadays is I just kind of run through my checklist in my head about, better ways that a person might have done this survey. I also try to look for, maybe the good things that they're doing here. I was like, oh, that was really good, or that was creative, thoughtful. Somebody put some thought into that. I'm really actually looking for that nowadays, rather than trying to find the negative stuff. I used to write people back, but I actually get a lot of, I get feedback from respondents that tell me what an idiot I am. And I know how much I appreciate it, so I've decided not to do the same thing to other people. On occasion, I'll get a telephone interview. Especially, I've got several like political interviews, or maybe you've got legal teams for a court case, and they're calling up and getting some information from a random sample, and it's so poorly done that I can't help myself, and I usually, in that case, I'll tell the person. I'll say, I know you're just an interviewer, but you did tell me this is being recorded for quality control purposes. So the person that's listening to this, the quality control person, just know X, Y, Z. So that's about as far as I go.
So, I found myself to become more compassionate,
yes,
especially with smaller like organizations or individuals. But I find myself getting kind of like upset when I get a poorly designed survey from a really big company, like a Fortune 500. And I'm like, come on, you guys have like all these consultants and like all these people getting paid so much, and you couldn't hire one survey methodologist or one consultant or something. And
it's the tragedy of the commons again, right? It's just like, we don't need to pay everybody knows how to do a survey, right? I take surveys all the time. I could write one. I can, and as you know, as you've pointed out in your podcast several times, is that there's so much more to doing a survey right, the science of it and the art of it, and combining those two, than most people would realize. And so, yeah, that's why you get a little upset when you see these things, because you're just like, yeah, you were thinking it was going to be easy.
I had this idea for the podcast, and I don't know, it's still there. But one idea is like to have an alter ego that like tears apart all these like bad surveys from the big companies,
right?
Not the little guy, but I didn't have. I don't know if I can do that. So, but it's still there, like as an idea, where it's like,
it's a great idea. I mean, you really should do that. I think you could do that without naming the company. You could just, I think your listeners might really love that, to be able to see an example or hear an example of, or maybe a reputable company that's doing a poor job.
You don't think companies need to be named?
Well, you just said you didn't know if you could get away with doing it. I was just thinking that maybe you were just a little bit nervous about some sort of.
Well, yeah, maybe a little bit nervous about taking like a negative spin, but I'm definitely in support of whistleblowers or justice and I mean, I've had some experiences with big companies. I mean, small issues and big issues. Like, for example, it really irks me when with Microsoft Word, they'll ask, like, sometimes a mini survey will pop up with two questions. And one of the questions is like, how much do you like this product? And I'm like, well, that's a little bit leading, like, why not ask how much do you like or dislike this product or something like that? And it's like, you're gonna get skewed results. Maybe they're a little bit skewed, but there's gonna be some measurement error in there.
Absolutely, yeah.
And you're such a big company, and this survey is going out to so many people who use this Microsoft product. So I just feel like they could have done a little bit better. And then maybe I won't do a series on this, but I'll share my story too. And I remember flying British Airways.
Okay.
And I'm going to name names.
Okay. You guys all heard it.
And I remember, I remember flying overseas to Europe one summer. And I had multiple flights with them because to get to my destination, I had to take many connecting flights. And I was flying with British Airways the whole time. And it was really interesting because I saw their sampling methodology. And it was like after every flight, within 24 hours, I would get an email with an invitation to a survey. How was your flight? Like, was it on time? How was the service? This and that. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool. Like, I love their systemic approach. And then I had one flight that was delayed on takeoff, and it was further delayed at landing. So in total, it was like a 3-hour delay, like from beginning to end of like when we're supposed to like get off the plane. And there were issues with the service and the entertainment system and everything. And then I was looking for the survey, and it never came. And I'm like, wow, that's really interesting. That's very, I don't know if it's on purpose or intentional, but like, just imagine if it was selective that somebody who's collecting all this customer satisfaction data, and I'm not saying that this is intentionally done, but isn't it convenient that a survey didn't go out to the one flight that I had that had multiple delays and multiple issues, and probably the most unsatisfied customers of all the flights that I've been on with British Airways?
That's a really good point. And Ajahn, I think that you and Sun Yup, as creators of this podcast, could find yourself in a position where you could contact the person in charge of that particular survey and ask them the question. Just introduce yourself, work your way up the phone chain until you get to the person, and let your listeners know what the response was. That would be fun.
I just thought it was an interesting coincidence.
It is. And I've seen the same thing. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily at airlines, but I've seen things where, you just get, okay, I've just filled out 15 surveys, or I had 15 survey requests from the same company for certain things, but now I have something that's critical, and I don't get the survey, So I've seen that. It does make you wonder. Sounds pretty suspicious to me.
Interesting. There's this one issue that I wanted to ask you. Is data collected from surveys always going to be something that we should be skeptical about?
Phrased that way, I think that's a good way to phrase that question. Because yes, the answer is definitely yes. You should be skeptical. I think that there are plenty of surveys done out that are done poorly, and that there are other surveys that are done to produce a desired result. And those are two types of surveys that you should definitely be aware of, and you should be very skeptical of those results. So I think it's important that the public educate themselves on what makes a good survey and how to look up the survey methods that were used. It's not rocket science, that part, and being able to figure out, well, okay, given what is described here as the methods that were used, is this a survey that the results I might be able to trust? So yeah, it is important to be skeptical. However, obviously done correctly, its most basic form, a survey really is meant to be able to measure a statistic within a population. And how well it does that depends on the methods that were used. So keep that in mind. And surveys obviously can be used to measure those statistics accurately. So I think that's the thing that I would want to make sure that I communicate to a skeptic.
So it is possible, you're saying, to collect good data from surveys.
Well, I hope so. So I've been doing this for a long time now. And yes, it is possible. But it is also possible to have the best intentions and still collect your data poorly or interpret it poorly. So that's obviously something you want to avoid as well.
That is true. Something I've been worrying about a lot in writing my dissertation findings. So
yeah. It's political polling. It's really interesting because you can see, especially at the presidential approval ratings and stuff like that. They're coming out all over the place, and you can see that some polls consistently produce, either higher or lower approval ratings of say, the president than the rest of them. And it's fun with those ones to see if you can dig in and try to kind of figure out, well, what were the methods used? And oftentimes polls just do not, it's just like, these are proprietary methods. We're not going to tell you how we do this, but here's what we come up with. And I would just kick those to the curb. So,
yeah, I remember last fall, before the election, I was trying to look into the different polls and the methodologies, and I couldn't find anything. It was really difficult to find anybody who said anything about like how they collected their data, what was their sampling frame, anything. Yeah, it was. You're right. Like, I think they do treat it as proprietary, and maybe because they feel like they're in competition with one another. But then when it comes to, assessing the validity of the results, is difficult for us average folk. So.
Well, that's a really good point, Astrid, too, is that, you're old enough to remember when news agencies, news groups would report on survey results, and they would tell you things like, sample error. They would describe it on air. And every time you would hear, especially some of the major news networks describe the study, they would include things like sample error.
Wait, sorry.
Yeah.
Can we talk about that for the audience? What do you mean by sampling error?
Well, that's a very good question. I would refer back to your episode 3 of your podcast. No, I'm just not. I know you described it at some point in one of your podcasts. But yeah, sampling error is that is the error the intrinsic error that occurs when you draw a sample from a population rather than surveying the entire population. Meaning that once you draw that smaller sample, it can be representative of that population. But there is a little bit of, I suppose there's a window of wiggle room that is just going to happen because you do that.
So in the past, are you saying they would report things like confidence?
You would see
intervals and margin of error or.
Yes. Yeah, margin of errors. Okay. And once a newscaster would finish talking about a survey, you would almost every time hear them say, and these results are within plus or minus 3%. They wouldn't necessarily mention the confidence error or confidence level, but they would certainly talk about margin of error. And somewhere along the line, I don't know what year, but news quit describing that, and I suspect maybe people thought, well, the population that our listeners don't understand it, or maybe it's not important. But I can tell you, as a young child, listening to Walter Cronkite, deliver the news, and me just asking my parents, well, what does that mean, plus or minus 3%, and having them tell me. I mean, I understood it perfectly, and people out there in the news world, quit thinking that you're audience is that dumb. These things are really important. So I would love to see us get back to that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember doing the calculation for the sample size for my own dissertation, and the difference between having a 5% margin of error or a 3% margin of error literally costs hundreds of dollars, because to get that higher level of precision, you just need so many more respondents.
You do, right? That's right.
But having the higher level of precision then also gives me more confidence that the findings that I have are representative of the population.
Exactly. And that your readers, your listeners, the consumers of those results should also understand the very basics and realize, oh my gosh, this is, these results are plus or minus 20%. That's a 40% spread. I probably really shouldn't put much stock into the results of this survey versus one that you're talking about where you got plus or minus 3%. At the 99% confidence level, something like that. That makes a lot more difference. You should have a lot more trust in something like that.
So where's the breakdown in society? Is it failure of grade school education or high school or college or?
It's the media. It's the media. People are, people really aren't that dumb, and I think that the media definitely are in competition with each other for more eyeballs, for more clicks, and perhaps the way to do it is to get rid of some of this extraneous but important information that maybe people they think that people aren't going to pay attention to. But I would say that journalists, newsrooms, they have an obligation to their audiences to provide that information. I'd love to see us get back to that, but I place the blame on the media for that.
Interesting.
Well, but we as consumers also, we make those choices too. Maybe we choose to consume news which doesn't include those types of important details versus seeking out news sources that do.
That's another very interesting point.
Yeah, another way to look at it.
So, are you aware of some news sources that actually include that kind of information? I mean, I could imagine things like, the New York Times would probably.
The New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, the Guardian tends to do those types of things. I can still see it occasionally in maybe some local news coverage where they'll do that. But it's certainly missing from things like Fox News, CNN. It's missing. We used to see that on CNN, but I don't see it anymore. So I would. If you're listening to this podcast and you're concerned about those type of things, I would suggest seeking out sources that are a little more transparent. And
it makes me think, if there's a news organization that I like, I would reach out to them directly and be like, hey, could you include this information? Maybe they actually would.
I got my undergraduate degree at Washington University in broadcasting. Did I tell you that?
In Washington State University.
Here, in broadcasting. And that is actually how I first started working with Don Dillman, was because in the early 90s, he was working for the U.S. Census Bureau to try to revamp their census, the census form, and he decided that we needed some pretty detailed video work. So Don and I, in about 1992, we used a technique of cognitive interviewing in which we videotaped people filling out various census forms, and what we did is we used the broadcasting studios at Washington University, brought our subjects in, and would give them a form to fill out, and then we would have an overhead camera zoomed in on the form and their hand as they were, filling out with paper and pencil the census form. Early in our very first couple of trial runs of this, we realized that people we had their audio, but a lot of times people aren't saying anything, and we would see, people would stop they would stop filling out the form. They pause. And you're like, what are they doing? Are they thinking hard? Are they picking their nose? What's happening here? And so Don's like, I wish we could get their face on that. And so we said, yeah, we can do this. And so we brought in additional cameras. And we, back in the early 90s, this was actually a tricky thing to do. It's not tricky anymore, but it was back then.
Oh yeah, now with the cell phone camera, you just
yeah.
You just place a cell phone on the table, and you got a nice view.
Yeah.
A high definition camera pointing upwards.
We'd have to have these multiple shots, and then we'd have to go back into the editing room and synchronize them frame by frame to make sure that we would have a picture-in-picture edit, so we'd have that person's face. Yeah. And so we'd get a better idea. Coders could code out the behaviors that way. And then we were able to send that off to the Census Bureau. And as you may know, or maybe your listeners don't know, is that Don Dillman and this work that we did at Washington State University on those census forms led to a major revolution in how those, in fact, most government forms are created. The 1990 census and census form was a disaster. It was just I remember receiving it too as a student. I couldn't fill it out because I didn't know how. It unfolded like a roadmap, and I wasn't sure where to begin or end. Once I was kind of done, I couldn't even figure out how to fold it back up, It was a disaster. And so Don worked for about 5 years, and I worked right alongside him, filming people, interviewing people that were filling out these forms, and coding their behaviors until we came up with the 2020 U.S. Census form, and it's still being used today.
The 2000.
I'm sorry, the 2000. It's in 2020. The 2000 Census form, right? And that basic format, the basic change that we suggested, is still being used today. And it goes back to those videos that we shot in the studio.
No, that's fascinating. I hadn't even thought about using that kind of a technique to actually work on developing these surveys. So it's an interesting story. I appreciate you sharing that with me.
Yeah, it's very cool. It was a lot of fun, actually. It was really fun working on that project. And then that's kind of how Don and I began working together. And I worked on I think all of his methods research projects at the SSRC from then on out.
So, we're going to wrap up soon just because I don't want to take up more of a lot of time
it's
that we
spring
have.
break. I'm fine.
Oh, man. And thanks again, by the way.
Oh,
for the
yeah,
coffee.
absolutely. Yeah, it's great.
I was going to ask you, so if let's say somebody's just starting off and they're actually interested in conducting surveys and they're not in college, they're not at WC, they can't take our course.
Right.
Other than saying, hey, buy the Dillman and colleagues 2014 book, what would you say to somebody who's just starting off, like who wants to start and get into survey design, other than obviously like listen to my podcast?
Well, your podcast is a great place to start. That was going to be my answer, actually. But a person can actually learn a heck of a lot about asking questions, interacting with strangers by working in the call center. And I think back to my time working in our call center and how even to this day that helps me. While we don't do as many telephone surveys anymore, we do a lot of internet surveys and mail surveys, intercept surveys, that type of thing. That experience directly translates to, I think a lot of my ability to put together good surveys today in print form. So that would be a really good place to start. It's just even work for a month or two in a call center. If you're really serious about it, you will learn a lot doing that.
Any kind of call center?
Yeah. I think any kind of call center, because it's it's that process of talking to people. When you're doing a survey, you're doing a cold call. When you send a survey in the mail, it's a cold call. If you're sending it via email, cold call. So learn how to do that. Learn how to interact with people. And I know we're talking here about voice versus print or visual, but there's still principles that apply and cross over. So I would definitely do that. There are also lots of easy to digest textbooks out there. Actually, Dillman and Priscilla Salant put one together, a book together years ago, just to address, that novice survey. Someone who's never done this before, but needs to put out a survey. I forget the name of it, but it was Dillman and Salant. That's worth looking into.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
How about this question? What's the most fun you've had working on a survey? I mean, other than the stories you shared with the Seattle water boats.
The poop in Portage Bay one? That was fun. What's the most fun I've had? Working on a survey or in the survey world? Oh my goodness. I have to think back. I've been doing this for 37 years, so that's a long time to think back on. Most fun. I would say, actually, I think the most fun I had on a single survey was doing tourism intercept surveys at Canaveral Seashore in Florida, which we were just talking about earlier. Just because that was just completely a unique experience. We were helping the national parks out with an economic visitor and tourism study to figure out what's the economic impact of tourists on various parks. This was the Canaveral Seashore. But once we got there, they made it clear that they've got other issues as well. They were having problems with tourists and dealing with mosquitoes. The intersection of tourists with mosquitoes, alligators, and nudists. And so what more fun could a surveyor have, a researcher have, than trying to figure out the impact of these three things? So that was a lot of fun. But I enjoy, I really just enjoy every time we have a new project come in, because I work on about 10 projects at a time, anywhere between 20 and 30 projects a year. Almost all of them are new. I mean, I don't know the. I'm an expert at the subject matter of these surveys, so I've got to figure out a little bit just to get a kind of a novice understanding of what it is that we're trying to do here before we start to really dig into trying to create a survey and administer one. So that's always just a super fun challenge.
Interesting. So learning about new subjects and figuring out how the survey can actually help them and achieve their goals.
That's right. And of course, I'll never be an expert at any of the subject matter of any of these things, but I'll at least know the right questions to ask of those experts in order to get the answers so that we can do a successful survey. So much fun. One of my favorite surveys that we worked on was for the national parks again. It was for Yellowstone Park in the 1990s. They were thinking it was a program, I think, to reintroduce wolves into Yellowstone Park, bringing them down from Canada. And we did a phone survey, and it was stratified into three sample frames. So we had a national survey, a national frame or national sample of
respondents.
Yeah, of residents. We had a regional one around Yellowstone, and then we had just a county-wide, just the counties that surrounded Yellowstone. It was the same survey, basically asking about people's thoughts about, well, what do you think about if we were to reintroduce wolves into Yellowstone? And I think there were some contingent valuation questions where we would ask things like, well, how much would you be willing to pay to have just the idea of having these wolves present. And it was fun doing those surveys. And we did the three samples in order. So we worked on the national one first, and then we moved to the regional one, and then we moved to that local one. And it was so fascinating to see the difference just in general in responses. In the national survey, we got a lot of folks who are like, "Oh, wolves are so cute. That would be great." And people were saying, they'd be willing to fork over a lot of money to have wolves in Yellowstone Park. And then of that, there was quite a few people who would say, I don't even know what a woof is. We found those responses to be interesting. And then when we moved to the regional one, there was a lot of environmental respondents who were environmentally aware and aware of the pros and cons. And so it was very different than the national survey as a whole. That was fascinating. And then when we finally moved on to the local issue right around there, we talked to a lot of ranchers. And of course, it was just full on negative. And it was, and a lot of folks who said, this is crazy because wolves are already here. They've been here all along, claiming that they're still there. I don't know if that was true, that they were there all along. But it was three just very stark groups of people. I just bring that up because that was so much fun, and it was just a really cool example of these of not only a stratified sample but stratified results and opinions. It was just very.
No, that is fascinating. I've only done national surveys myself, so but actually I've done nationals, but I've stratified based off of political identity. So in my dissertation, my survey, I have enough respondents to describe the Democrats and the Republicans separately, right? And it is actually fascinating. And I'm probably not going to leave this in the episode, but I wanted to share with you, right? Mm-hmm. Like one of my findings. So I had this idea, or one of my theories was that people who think that they could shield themselves from the problems or the hazards of the world, something technically called the inverted quarantine, so quarantining themselves from the world, will be more likely to support climate adaptation measures than climate mitigation, because might say something on the lines of like, well, if it gets too hot, I could install an air conditioning system and deal with it, rather than trying so hard to like lower the CO2 emissions in the world, and whereas at the same time people are building more coal-fired power plants and I don't know what. So it's like, so I had this idea that people who can think they could shield themselves are more likely to support adaptation than mitigation solutions. And actually, so that was supported, sure, yes, yeah. But then I had this secondary theory that talked about that. I had three hypotheses. So one is that what I just talked about, the inverted quarantine leads to more support for adaptation than mitigation. The other hypothesis was that Republicans will be more likely to have the inverted quarantine than Democrats.
That's what I would
just think of it this way: like, what's the picture you have in your mind of a standard Republican? It's someone who owns guns to protect themselves. Yeah. You own a gun to protect themselves because maybe you have less trust in government institutions and society and stuff like that. Yeah. So it kind of like lines up, right? Yeah. And it actually does turn out to be true that Republicans are about 50% more likely to have the inverted quarantine impulse, right?
Amazing.
And then the third hypothesis was about thinking about whether or not the interaction or Republicans who have the inverted quarantine, I assume that they'll be more likely to support adaptation measures and less likely to support mitigation measures.
Seems reasonable.
Than Republicans who don't have this inverted quarantine impulse.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Right?
Oh, that's perfect.
I'm trying to explain, like, why is it that Republicans in general have a lower level of support for climate mitigation, which is well documented, But I also have this information that says to me, well, they also show more support for adaptation. So I'm trying to explain it through this impulse, this inverted quarantine impulse. And it turns out, so this is partially supported because Republicans who do have the inverted quarantine, so in general, Republicans have less support than Democrats for adaptation.
Right. For mitigation.
For both.
Oh, for both. Okay. Oh.
But it turns out that Republicans who have this inverted quarantine impulse have higher levels of support for both adaptation and mitigation compared to other Republicans who don't have the inverted quarantine.
Whoa, wait, let me think about that for a second.
Yeah, so I thought the Republicans who felt like they could shield themselves from the problems of the world will have higher levels of support for adaptation. And that's true.
Yeah.
And I thought they would have lower levels of this idea that we could reduce global warming altogether.
Right.
But it turns out that they actually have higher levels of support for that action as well.
Interesting. What?
So
what do you think is what do you think is going on there?
I mean, think of it. Let's use the gun analogy, right?
Yeah.
I think so. Regardless of how you feel about gun rights and protecting yourselves with guns and stuff like that, imagine somebody who feels like they need a gun to shield themselves from the problems of society, like the lawlessness of society. If they're so aware of their safety that they're carrying a gun, they might also be so aware of the problems of society that it's not a zero-sum game to say that why not also work on trying to reduce the problems of society while still believing that they could protect themselves.
Yeah.
So kind of like that. So with climate change, it's like, well, yeah, I could protect myself from the problems of climate change. I'm aware of the problems of climate change. Why not at the same time trying to reduce the problems of climate change and make it easier for me to protect myself?
Does that trend exist with Democrats?
No. So the Democrats, they have the same level of support regardless of this inverted quarantine.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That is fascinating, Osrin.
I think so.
This is a publishable paper.
I hope so. We'll see what my committee says.
That is really cool. That is some cool stuff. This was with Prolific. It was a panel.
Yes. I had an N 2,113. So I had over 1,000 Republicans and Democrats.
You know where this goes, though. What happens is the next step is to do this with an address-based sample.
Yes. That's part of my conclusion chapter, talking about the limitations of a convenient sample through Prolific.
But think about this. If you were to, either way, if you were to do an address-based sample nationwide, study the same thing, using the same survey, it doesn't matter what the results are, it will be extraordinarily interesting. Whether that address-based sample supports the results from your panel or doesn't, it says different things and it says interesting things.
Huh. I mean, I would be worried if it didn't say the same thing.
If it doesn't say the same thing, then you have essentially a mode effect. Yeah.
Interesting.
Right? You have a mode effect. And that's interesting.
So there is some truth in that. I'm very much aware that the sample in my dissertation study is different from the general population because I compared my sample with census data.
Census data, sure.
They're more higher educated, younger, higher incomes.
Education a little higher usually.
So,
maybe not necessarily. What about education? Right.
They were better educated than the general population.
I wonder about that because I know a lot of panel folks. I know a lot of people that participate in panels, and it seems like there's a lot of them who have the lower levels of education.
Interesting.
Because it's super fast, quick, easy way to make some beer money, and they're not paying attention to the questions. We've had that conversation, right? But Prolific is different. I mean, that panel is, it's curated, and I know they use a lot of techniques to try to mitigate those panelists who are not paying attention. So, interesting. Super cool stuff. I can't wait to read it. Is it over 100 pages? Because I can't read over 100 pages.
If it's single spaced, then no. It's less than 100.
Okay, that's good. We'll single space it. I'll read it.
Well, I just want to say thank you again for agreeing to do this interview.
Oh,
I really
yes,
appreciate
absolutely.
it.
Absolutely.
It was a great conversation.
This is a pleasure. Anytime, Mustard. Anytime. So, yes. We'll have to get Sonia up in here, too.
That was my conversation with Thom Allen, project manager at the Social and Economic Sciences Research Center at Washington State University. If you enjoyed this episode and want to see more like this, give us a follow and a share. Take a few minutes to give our podcast a good rating. It helps other people find us, and it helps us keep going. Write me at totalsurveydesign@gmail.com with any questions or comments. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening.